Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well. My name is Rohan, and I would be the moderator for today's exciting event. I would firstly like to thank you for taking the time out to attend the EdTech Power Hour session hosted by Harbinger. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Power Hour is a series of interactive roundtable discussions amongst industry stalwarts where they would be sharing their experiences and insights on a particular topic. So the topic for today's discussion would be leveraging micro-credentials for economic mobility. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping tips. In case you cannot hear the audio, ensure you have selected the right speaker for audio output. You may test the same to see if it is working fine from the audio settings option on the lower left corner of your screen. And if necessary, please dial in using a phone. With that, it's time for introduction. Our host for today's roundtable is Rahul Singh. Rahul is a digital learning enthusiast and is passionate about helping organizations and leaders solve challenges around learner engagement and student outcomes through intervention of learning technologies. In a career span of over 15 years in the digital learning space, he has helped a host of global organizations and educational institutions in implementing new initiatives around their digital learning strategy. We welcome you, Rahul, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rohan, for the introduction. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time out to join us for this discussion. We want this to be an interactive discussion. So at any point of time, if you have any questions, thoughts, and comments, please feel free to type them in the chat box or in the Q&A box. And we will make sure that we address those questions or we, kind of bring up your thoughts for the audience. Right, so moving ahead, in terms of today's discussion. So what's our game plan for today? So what are we going to talk about? So primarily, firstly, we are going to look about, what's more relevant, degrees or skills? What's cooking between degrees versus skills? The second thing that we will look at is we will try to define the role of micro-credentials in shortening the skill gap. We'll also try to define how micro-credentials can be integrated with your competency-based education model. And lastly, we'll identify the role of blockchain in implementing a scalable micro-credential system. So this is basically our game plan for today. And with that, let me welcome our panelists for today. We have Ginger Lin with us, founder and EVP at BadgeCert. Good morning, Ginger. Thank you very much for this discussion.
My pleasure.
How are you doing today?
So far, so good, right? Everything looks up when the sun is shining.
Absolutely, Ginger. And thank you very much for taking the time out to join us for this discussion. Ginger, for our audience, could you please briefly tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, what your organization is all about?
Absolutely. So again, thank you for having me at this panel discussion. As Rahul said, my name is Dr. Ginger Lin. I'm the founder and CEO of BadgeCert. We are an organization that provides digital badges or digital credentials for many of the leading organizations in the world, including corporations. We also work with a lot of associations to recognize and reward their constituents with digital badges that represent their hard-earned credentials. We work with higher ed institutions to be able to recognize and reward their students in lots of different ways. And we have been in business for about 9 years. My background, I was a professor of education before starting the company. So I have a deep knowledge of curriculum design and various aspects related to learning and development. And we came to digital badges and digital credentials from the viewpoint that we needed a vehicle to be able to recognize and reward various professionals for all the things that they were doing professionally that they weren't able to basically showcase on various medium, including social media. So as that started to develop, we became interested in this medium, and really excited today to start to have the conversation about what's possible in micro-credentialing.
And thank you very much, Ginger. And it's very interesting to know that a professor of education moves on and picks up a technology 9 years back, which was, probably not very popular, and there were not too many takers for that technology, and now after 9 years, I'm sure, Ginger, you would be pretty satisfied with the amount of noise that micro-credentials is creating in the industry, and the sheer volume of organizations, or the number of organizations who are willing to, either they have already adopted or are willing to adopt this technology.
Absolutely. So, when we started our business, it was more trying to evangelize the idea. So I spent the first couple years doing a lot of talking, a lot of public speaking, and helping basically people to understand the power of what digital badges and digital credentialing can do for professionals across the world. And so after that, the ball started getting rolling, and we've been in business ever since.
Absolutely. And thank you very much once again for joining us. It will be very interesting to know about your insights in terms of how we are, kind of going to use the micro-credentials, and, specifically in terms of economic mobility. Right. So let me bring up my PowerPoint again on the screen. Okay. So, right. So we have the PowerPoint here. Yeah, just give me a moment, please. Right. So for our audience, you might have noticed that, on social media, we had said that, Detlef Holt, head of digital learning experience from Roche, would be joining us as a panelist. Detlef got his, vaccination today, and so he couldn't make up for this panel discussion. But, if there are any specific questions or queries for Detlef, we are very much open to take those questions. We'll pass them on to Detlef, and we'll ensure that, they get answered on the email. So I just wanted to kind of apprise you of this development. Right. So now moving ahead. So we were talking about the first point in our agenda, and we said that, we'll take a look in terms of all this discussion happening, whether it's degrees or skills or a combination of both, and what's cooking, what's the industry is talking about, what some of the research papers are saying, what some of the data that is available out there. And before we get into the research and the data, I read this somewhere and I found this very interesting, very relevant in today's terms. It says, it doesn't matter what industry you are in, the demand for skills changes at such a rapid pace, your organization has to keep learning. And this is not that, something which was written like, yesterday. This was written quite some time back, but it's so relevant in these days because everyone is talking about the continuous learning, the lifelong learning journey, and all those things. And yes, absolutely, we are at a situation, or we are at a cusp of, this skill economy, where there's so much drastic changes happening in terms of talent shortage and talent acquisition, skill development, and other things. And now then let's look at some interesting data, some interesting statistics, some interesting research. One of the reports says, and you'll get to read more about these reports through the links which you'll get in your chat window. So Tim Cook, as per a statement by Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, nearly 50% of Apple employees include people who never went to college. That's a huge number, 50% at Apple, and just consider the amount of employees that Apple has. Second one, as per a business report, as per a Harvard Business School report. Now, degree holders ask for a 12% to 30% more wages, but it does not guarantee higher productivity. So that's an interesting statistic to look at for all the talent acquisition managers and talent acquisition leaders out there. An organization like Siemens, the CEO at Siemens said that, just because someone has a 4-year degree doesn't mean they are more talented or suitable for a job. So it shows the mindset of some of the leading leaders and the industry leaders in terms of how they're opening up for hiring for skills versus just focusing on degrees. Uh, Early this year, there was a report from US Labor Department. It's called the JOLTS report. And as per the JOLTS report, 76% of employers were able to fill in about 1 in 15 open positions across US. I mean, just, if you want to do some basic math out there, 76% of employees, and then you're just about filling 1 in 15 open positions. It's a talent war out there. And we all are experiencing, and I mean, in every form, in every shape, irrespective of the industry that you are and all those things. Ginger, what are your initial thoughts on some of these numbers and statistics? Do you find them relevant, or it is just something outrageous?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think they are absolutely relevant. And I think, with degrees from higher ed institutions, I think that while those are oftentimes gatekeepers, so a lot of times, that's the first thing that somebody needs in order to enter into a career. So that's, again, one of the major things that we look for first. But as some of your statistics show, they aren't what makes somebody successful at work, which is, Apple's statistics there are really interesting for that reason. So what we find is that organizations that do exceptionally well with hiring are those that really understand the skills necessary in order to be very successful in a position. And that a degree certainly does not showcase what somebody can do. It shows that somebody can complete a degree. And those are two very different things. And I'll say, as a professor, when I was in the classroom, people could pass my course. Maybe it was a B, maybe it was an A, what have you, because they completed the work. And it was very difficult for me as a professor to basically create a course that was that provided that capability of saying, no, you're not going to be good. I was in higher education for teacher education, and what I found was that there were things like classroom management, like curriculum design, all these kinds of things that somebody has to be able to do. But I was not able to recognize those various nuanced skills, if somebody was really good at those, before they were going to look for a position in a school. So that was really when I look at some of these statistics, that's really where the interest going forward lies, is this capability of recognizing folks for the things that they can do rather than the things that they can complete in terms of higher education. So I think when I look at these numbers, it is absolutely reflective of what we're seeing in the job force. In terms of hiring managers, they really do want some assurances that somebody has capabilities for communication, some of the simple soft skills that cannot possibly be recognized by showcasing a degree that you've earned, even from the most esteemed places in the world. So I think that when I look at these numbers, I'm certainly seeing that anecdotally from the folks that were looking in HR in various corporations, but just in general, what we're seeing in terms of what's available to people today in online learning, as we're going through this pandemic and people are becoming far more comfortable in online learning, all sorts of different opportunities will arise from looking at, okay, what are the skill sets that I'm missing? Where are my gaps and how can I fill those? To organizations, corporations that are providing sort of internal universities at their workplaces to be able to provide skills training for their employees to be able to do the kinds of jobs that they need to do successfully.
And thank you, Ginger, for sharing your thoughts there. And I think you rightly said in terms of there has to be a mechanism, a system of, which can recognize the skills, certain competencies, and the ability to perform a job in a more effective and efficient manner. And I think that brings us to our next question in terms of, I wanted to ask you this question is, in two parts. One is that, what basically are micro-credentials? Because there's still, even for me personally, I mean, I understand the basics of it, but I do not understand the whole 9 yards of it. So for a discussion perspective, if you could please throw some light in terms of what basically are micro-credentials, and then how does micro-credentials, help in identifying certain skills or competencies at a very high level?
Great question. So there is a lot of language that goes around. So micro-credentials is one of those uh, words that I think is confusing in this space. So there's two things that are going on when we talk about micro-credentials. So the first piece of that is digital badges. So we have these two parts of this. Digital badges are icons that are packed with metadata that help represent what somebody is, a degree or a certificate or something else that somebody has earned. So that's the space that I'm in. That's the company that we have, that an organization is able to go in and basically create a digital badge that represents a credential. But that isn't a micro-credential. So the nomenclature is kind of confusing there because people interchange those two things. So a digital badge can represent a license, a certification, a certificate, or a micro-credential. So when we think about what micro-credentials are, that's a subset of what a credential is, which is, again, the term there, micro-credentials, makes a lot of sense for that purpose. And a micro-credential basically is a nuanced competency or skill that somebody has developed, and it can be recognized through digital badges or in other ways. So the reason that I like the concept of micro-credentials is that I'm going to give the example of a corporation. So a corporation would say, all right, here's the job that somebody needs to do. How can we break that down into the skills and competencies that somebody needs in order to be able to perform that job successfully? And once they do that and go through that process of saying, okay, here are the different skills and competencies that somebody needs, they can earn micro-credentials for each one of those sets, that skill set. And so designing curriculum around that is important. Certainly, if it's not a direct curriculum where it's literally learning those kinds of things in a course, if it's not that, how can we help them to develop those skills and competencies in their work world or what have you? So when we break those things down, we can then say, all right, how do we represent that? How do we know that somebody is capable of doing that? And that's where digital badges come in. So as somebody earns a micro-credential, an authority in the space says, yes, this somebody can perform this task, somebody has this competency or skill, and a digital badge then could be awarded to them that somebody can then display on LinkedIn, Facebook, email signatures, or internally within a profile, so that if an organization's looking for somebody with that exact skill set, they could say, all right, let's look across our board, see who's earned the digital badge for having that micro-credential, and then go forward and basically assign that person to a specific task.
And this is interesting, and thank you very much for helping us understand the difference or the relation in terms of what a digital badge is and what exactly a micro-credential is. The interesting aspect that I found was designing the curriculum around this. I heard that's very important part of this entire ecosystem.
Yeah, so the other piece of that is that micro-credentials can be what we call stacked or leveled up. So we go to sort of gamification to understand and see where some of that information came from. So when we think about the gamification or the stackability of what micro-credentials can be, I find that that's really where the meat and potatoes of this can happen, and where really interesting curriculum design can happen. So I look at micro-credentials in two ways. One is a sort of a horizontal model, and one is more of a vertical model. So when we think about micro-credentials as a hierarchy, where one skill set can be built upon the other, and we need to look at it in a hierarchy in terms of what does somebody need to start with and where can they go from there. So when we're thinking about designing curriculum around micro-credentials, we really want to break down those skills and competencies to help somebody to develop across the board. So when we think about professional development in general, I think about that as that stackable opportunity to say, okay, skill A, skill B, skill C automatically will then level up to skill D, and somebody can then earn that more broad recognition for having expertise or mastery of a specific skill set or competency. So that's more the hierarchy model. But what we're seeing in the space is also more of that, that horizontal model. So where we look at it as sort of a level playing field, and we can say, all right, so if somebody wants to do a specific job, what are some of the various things that they need to learn? And they may not need to do it in a hierarchy, so not that vertical piece of it, but we can do it sort of as a horizontal, where they can say, all right, I'm going to pick and choose the things I need for that job, and then learn those, the micro credentials, and gain acknowledgement that I have that capability across the board. So I look at that as sort of like choose your own adventure. How am I going to build my own professional skill set so that I'm capable of performing a task or entering the job world with the skills and competencies that have been recognized by an authority in the space, to be able to sort of promote myself in the job world and say, yep, not only can I do it, am I saying I can do this, but here's the authority in the space that says I can do these different things.
I think this portion that you mentioned about the stackable part of the micro credentials and the design aspect of bringing in the gamification design, this portion was pretty interesting. I think specifically for the instructional designers, they would like to take a note of this and how to go about designing a curriculum which you can tie with. So there are two things happening here, very interestingly, that you are designing a curriculum which is driving competency-based education or outcome-based education, and you're also able to create, you're also able to tie in the micro credentials. So that's kind of a more of a holistic end-to-end solution. And then one last piece. I mean, this entire micro credential definition is very interesting, and that's why I'm kind of taking a little more time on this first question with you. I hope you don't mind about that. So you mentioned that authority, so the verification body who verifies. Could you please tell us a little bit about that? I mean, who are those people and how does it actually happens?
It's a great question. So a lot of the organizations that we work with are associations, so professional associations in various spaces. So that is one way that we can look at authority in a space. So they are an organization that is centered around certification or licensure in a specific area. So that can be certainly a large authority in a space. What they've done is they've gone across, they've oftentimes done what we call a job task analysis, or JTA. So they've looked at in their field or their industry and said, okay, here's all the skills and competencies somebody needs in order to be successful in this particular industry. And they've created a certification around it. So that's when we work with a lot of our clients, they are those associations that have high stakes, oftentimes assessment-based types of credentials that somebody can earn separate from a degree program. Oftentimes, an individual needs a specific degree in order to be able to enter into the industry and even sit for the exam for that association or that credential. So we have those individuals who are sort of emerging into the field, who are getting ready to sit for that exam. And then we also have people who have earned a certification or a certificate, certification, license, or what have you, and then they're post-certification. So what I find is that those authorities in the space are starting to say, okay, what can we do to help further provide a value add for the people in our industry? And so I'm finding that with micro-credentialing in particular, they're being a lot more creative with saying, okay, what is those emergent skills? What are the skills somebody needs in order to pass our assessment? And then what are the things that somebody can do to showcase that they have certain nuanced expertise and a specific skill set beyond certification? So that's one of the types of authorities that I see most often in an industry, but certainly there are other authorities in terms of training providers that are even more of a smaller skill set, particularly in the IT space. So we're finding those are authorities who are particularly training, let's say, on Salesforce or on a specific product. So what we're finding is that there are a lot of those types of training providers in various industries, and they have courses, and both online and face-to-face types of courses that are either assessment-based or competency-based. So we have both of those operating in the space in general. And then there's other types of organizations like higher ed institutions. And I see them also moving into that arena where, yes, you can earn a degree from them, but many universities, higher ed institutions in general, are also developing professional programs so that somebody with or without a degree can come enter into their university world and just take a very small, maybe a 8 to 10 to 12 week course whereby they are, again, the authority is saying, yep, somebody has passed this course and they're able to do these things. So we're finding those are the types of authorities in the broader ecosystem of recognition.
Thank you. Thank you very much for explaining this. I think this has kind of made me clear about what a micro credential is, how it operates, and all the different aspects of it. The last point that you mentioned about higher ed moving to digital badges or micro credentials, that point is very interesting, and that could be a potential game changer. We'll come back to that question in our conversation later, and we would like to know your thoughts there. So, so now let's move on to our next question in terms of, and for a moment, let's just take a look at the chat if we have any specific questions from our audience, so we could probably answer them. Maybe more of a comment. It says the concept of continuing competence is used to describe the goal of a nimble, responsive credentialing program.
I'm trying to read it again along with you. The concept of continuing competence is used to describe the goal of a nimble, responsive credentialing program. Absolutely. So I think what Mark is talking about here is really looking at how an individual is able to kind of move on and continue their capability of learning. I think that that's what he's trying to get at there. And what he's calling it a responsive credentialing program, but I think that that is exactly what great credentialing programs are able to do, is that they are able not only to provide opportunities for somebody to become certified or credentialed, but also to continue the opportunities for somebody to grow and develop. So when we look at those types of organizations, they're not just providing opportunities for individuals to earn that credential. They're also saying, okay, what else can somebody do? What else can we recognize within the industry so that somebody who has gone above and beyond just the credential can also be recognized? So when we think about engagement in a specific industry, we do want to provide opportunities for people post-credential to continue to be involved and to engage within our communities. So we look at something like mentorship. That's an opportunity to earn a micro-credential in a specific area. Leadership, somebody who is participating in various ways as a leader in the industry. Certainly somebody who has a specific nuanced skill beyond just the generalized certification. So I think in the healthcare space, as an example, somebody may have, let's say they are a sonographer, an echo sonographer. They take pictures of people's hearts. And so they have a generalized certification around that. But perhaps in their workplace, they are specializing in maternal health or pediatrics or other types of skill sets or skill areas with specific types of patients, as an example. And so with that, how could they be recognized for that? Because it isn't a certification perhaps that the association provides, but they want to be recognized for the fact that they have a certain amount of hours, let's say, in those various types of skills specializations. So that's when we think about something that is very nimble in the credentialing space. It's those organizations that can say, all right, we may not have a certification around this, but what are ways that we can recognize people in our industry that have specialized in specific areas of expertise? So when I think about excellence in the area of recognition, that's what we think about.
Right, and thank you for clarifying that and sharing your thoughts there. So I'll tell you one thing in terms of, and I'm sure a lot of other people, not just the organization, not just in any specific industry, any domain. I think organizations across industry domain are facing this challenge in terms of talent acquisition, filling in the open positions, finding the right talent, finding the skill set. The talent acquisition teams, the talent acquisition leaders, I mean, never ever, I guess, they would have been under so much tremendous pressure to find the right skill set or the right talent. So, and again, see, if you go by the conventional hiring models, you can have a tons of psychometric tests or, assessments and, candidate profiling. You can bring in AI into the hiring piece, but eventually uh, it boils down to the performance on the floor, on the job floor.
For sure.
Right. So there is this time, and if it doesn't goes well as per what was expected, then the cycle starts back again. So you go back and start sourcing the next candidate. So you're actually losing on revenue, you're actually leaking money out there. So is there a way micro credentials can address some of the talent acquisition challenges? And along with all the other things, if we bring in micro credentials into the picture, can it help the talent acquisition teams and leaders make right decisions?
It's a great question. So I want to say, of course, but it isn't. It isn't just easy. Let's turn it on. So what I would say is that certainly as the industry, the learning industry changes, I think that micro credentials are certainly becoming more valued. Because I think you said, at the end of the day, everybody's coin operated, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit type of company, we all are have to make our revenue in some way. So when we look at that, we again want to invest in our employees and in our talent in ways that we want to have also retention. We don't want to train them and have them leave and go somewhere else as well. So when we think about making sure that individuals come to us, that we're able to provide certain training and capabilities that they again want to stay and they want to upskill within our corporations, that becomes extremely important, because it goes to the bottom line in terms of revenue, in terms of maintaining high quality within our workforce. So when we think about what micro credentials can do in those spaces, I think one of the aspects is that it doesn't always have to be homegrown. I do see a lot of corporations that do have their own education, arm of their companies. So certainly they can do that. But I think there are so many smaller training providers that do an excellent job. So I think one of the other things that bits of advice that I would have is seek out partners that do that are really good at certain areas, and bring them on to help provide that training and professional development that your staff needs. So when I think about what micro credentials are, not only some of the acquisition, but also maintenance and keeping people retaining that talent is also really vital. And I think that individuals, when they come to a corporation, they want to know that they're going to grow. They don't want to just come and be static, robots at your corporation. They want to know that they are going to be valued and that they're going to develop their own skills and competencies as part of your organization. So when we think about that idea of hiring, we also want to think about that concept of retention. And in terms of that hiring, really looking at deeply, what really does it take in order for somebody to be successful? Because it's both hard skills and soft skills. So certainly when we're thinking about those acquisitions, looking at what are the things that somebody needs to do well, and if we're not getting the candidates up front that we know have those skills and competencies, what can we do in order to help them develop those skills and competencies quickly, efficiently, and also maintain them.
Absolutely. I totally agree with your point in terms of it's not just about the acquisition part of it, but a lot of it is about retaining the talent. And, we're talking about millennials, we're talking about Gen Zs and the next generation of workforce. And I heard they are going to call them the Gen Alpha. And they want to know, right? They want to know that, what they're signing up for, in terms of what's the growth potential, how they would, develop their skills and everything. So I think that's a very valuable point that, it's not just about the acquisition, but the retention. And, a lot of organizations who have their education now should consider implementing a micro-credentialing system, probably, which kind of verifies or validates or, shows up that, okay, these particular individuals or these employees have skills in these certain segments. It will not only help the organization, it will also help the individuals, grow and perform better and be more productive. And that could be a big motivator for retaining your talent as well. So that's definitely, that's one interesting aspect. Right. So now I was thinking, Ginger, if it's okay, we'll take a little delve into the technology side of it.
Sure.
So, you know, there's a lot of talk about blockchain and, you know, in healthcare, in finance domain, you know, it can do a lot of things. It can simplify a lot of things. It's a wonderful technology. I wanted to kind of request you to please share your thoughts in terms of what role can blockchain play in setting up a micro credentialing system, and how can it simplify the lives of, you know, the talent development leaders, or, you know, the learning and development leaders.
So blockchain is a very interesting thing, and you know, I think as it becomes like AI, we've talked a little bit about that. You've kind of sprinkled that in a little bit as well. But blockchain is sort of one of the, you know, it's a concept that we get asked about constantly, because, you know, what is it? People are really excited about it. You know, I don't want to get over my skis too much. I'm not necessarily the technical person, but what I will say about blockchain and what I find fascinating about it is the capability to basically provide recognition for an individual that they can then not tamper with, and that it can be out there in the world and they can share. So one of the things that I find fascinating about where blockchain can take us from a talent perspective is it can anonymize potentially some of the things that we don't necessarily need to share, and will allow an individual to share the kinds of things that they want to about, you know, their skills and competencies. So as an example, if somebody earns a credential, or somebody has gone through a course or something like that where they have a specific skill set, they've been recognized by the authority, that credential can be written to a blockchain, so that yes, somebody's earned it, and that's where it gets placed. So that's where a little bit where digital badging kind of also jumps into, is recognizing somebody for something that they've done in a way that cannot be tampered with, that can be out there in the world, and that they can share. So it's portable. It's also public. It's also meaningful. So when we think about where how to recognize somebody for those things, that's a company like ours. That's what we do, is we sit between the issuing organization and the individual, and we become sort of that verification piece of that. And so what we find interesting about blockchain is that we can use the digital badging concept and write to the blockchain so that somebody can then have it. It's distributed, obviously, so it's tamper proof. And they can then share that both with you know, employers, or in the broader sense. So when I think about what the possibilities are, is when we think about licensure and credentialing, it could be literally anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the world of work. It could be things like my driver's license, or it could be certainly something like my medical records, or something like my insurance and my financial records. So if I have all those that data, and it's put on a block, you know, on the blockchain, I'm able then to share it with whomever I choose, and I can potentially redact my name, or redact some of the other aspects of my personally identifiable information, and share just the relevant pieces with whomever I choose to, with a key. And so what I find so interesting about where this could possibly go is that, you know, as a woman who wants to get hired, if there's any bias in the work world, I could potentially just say, here are the things that I've earned, here are the things that I've done, here are the authorities that have said I'm capable of doing this. You don't necessarily need to know about my background. You don't need to know about my ethnicity. You don't need to know about any of those things. You just need to know whether I'm capable of doing these things or not. So I find that that's where the space could potentially go, is anonymizing some of the information, but and only showcasing the things that an individual wants to showcase. I think of, you know, just a weird example would be if I'm going to a bar, I don't have to show the bartender that this is where I live and this is my DMV number and all the other things. I just have to show them that I'm 21. So I see that as kind of the most interesting part of where the blockchain technology can take us, is this capability of showcasing just the information that I need to showcase in order to show that I'm capable of doing whatever it may be. Like, I'm just 21, that's all you need to know about me, and then I'm ready to go. So I think that piece of the technology is so fascinating. It's not there yet, And that's, I think the other piece of that, certainly we could share things to the blockchain. There's no way of reading it right now. We're looking at different technologies of wallets and portfolios and things like that to be able to, basically deliver that information or showcase that information. So I see that is where some of the pieces of the industry are going. But certainly today, the tool that organizations have used, and that's again part of our business, is digital badges are serving that need right now. And from our business standpoint, we're moving towards blockchain technology to be at the forefront of what's possible.
And thank you very much for that explanation, Ginger. And I will totally agree with you in terms of, for every other thing, there's so much information that we need to share. I mean, for example, if I'm ordering something online, then why does everyone wants to know the date of birth? I mean, you just need
exactly
to
right.
get some specific details. And I think, the things related to the unconscious bias that you just mentioned, I think that would be a great game changer, because people are looking for, diversity, equity, inclusivity when it comes to hiring.
Exactly right.
And blockchain can play a, good role there. Well, there is a good question from Mark here, and I'll read that question out for you, Ginger. And please, I would request you to please answer that. And it's a very interesting perspective. Can micro-credentials and/or digital badges be revoked? Is that a possibility?
It's a great question, and absolutely. So that, to me, where we think about digital badging in particular, that's the best part about it, is in terms of what it can do, mitigate risk of somebody saying they're credentialed when they no longer are. So certainly in high stakes type of credentialing, this is a vital piece of that. So whereby, in the past, where we were saying, all right, somebody's passed a course, somebody's capable of doing something, here's your paper certificate, that could be completely rendered invalid, in terms of, I can put my name in there, I can change the date, I could just not submit it. So there's lots of reasons why there's fraud around paper certificates. So digital badges kind of put it got its foothold with the capability of not only recognizing something and someone who's earned a credential, and having that the capability for that individual to be able to display it on social media or on any kind of digital platform. It's almost more important for an organization to have some control over where over how that person is displaying their credentials. So being able to revoke a credential if it's expired, or if there's misconduct or anything like that, that becomes a huge part of what the purpose of the technology is that being able to have that capability of mitigating the risk of and protecting your integrity of your organization by being able to draw those credentials back, I think is a huge aspect of that.
Right, great. And so, so looking back at the structure, would it be fair to say that, if someone had to start thinking about where is the starting point for implementing micro-credentials in their ecosystem, would the starting point be, designing the curriculum, which maps to the outcome-based or competency-based education and the micro-credentials? So designing the curriculum, and then the technology that comes into picture that takes it from point A to point B and keeps it secure and tamper-proof, blockchain. And then at the end of it, is there a third component to it, or it's just the authority?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah. So what I would say, I always talk about it in terms of reverse design. So I always start at the end and then start to develop the curriculum. So I always say, okay, let's look at what we want somebody to be able to do. So what is that end result? What does that look like? So when I kind of, I say, okay, here's my job. This is what somebody needs to do. How do I then go and reverse design the curriculum to be able to meet that need? So I find that that's the best way of implementing micro-credentials, is saying, okay, here's what we need somebody to be able to do. And then designing the curriculum so that there is a scope and sequence around how it is that somebody can achieve that final goal. So when I talk about scope and sequence, I certainly look at, okay, what if people are going to be starting their journey in different places? So is there a way for us to say, okay, can we have some sort of assessment so that we can see what somebody's already capable of doing, and then have them jump in where, in the curriculum standpoint, in that longer scope where we can meet them where they're at. So that's one way that we can do it. or certainly developing that curriculum such that, okay, here is the stackable nature of this. In order to be able to achieve that final outcome, what are the things that somebody needs to do in order to get there? And so when I think about looking at a micro-credentialing program, I think the visual is also really important. And that's where, again, badges come in, because I think in terms of developing a micro-credentialing program, if you can show, all right, here are the different things that you need to do, here are the different stepping stones that you need in order to achieve that final outcome, being able to lay all that out so an individual then can also prepare themselves for going through that journey. So they can see, in a visual format, okay, I need to accomplish each one of these steps in order to achieve this final goal that I have in order to be able to be very successful in a specific job or a specific task. Having that visual is also really, really vital for having my own individual success and being able to self-regulate in order to achieve that final goal.
Right, thank you. And we'll just request the audience that, this is an important part in terms of, we understand that, okay, micro-credentials are great. They're going to help us solve some challenges, some problems. It can simplify the lives of talent acquisition and talent development leaders. Blockchain is a technology that can support it and enable it. But I think the key is, how do we go about it, implementing it? So I just want to take a pause here, and if anyone in the audience has any specific questions, thoughts, or comments, and you want to know more, you can ask here, or we can also take this discussion offline towards the end of the discussion. We'll share Ginger's email ID in the chat. You can reach out to Ginger for understanding on the micro-credentials part of it. And you can reach out to us as well at Harbinger if you need to know more about blockchain and all the other technologies. But just wanted to kind of take a quick pause here and check if there's any comments, thoughts, questions on the implementation part of it. Right, so fair enough. And if there's anything that comes up in your mind, please do not hesitate to put it in the chat box or the Q&A section. So moving ahead, before we kind of summarize today's discussion and open it up for the Q&A, just wanted to request, Ginger, that one or two cases on the top of your mind which you recall, wherein you have implemented micro-credentials and then you have seen some results, positive results, or maybe not positive results as well, something that didn't work. Both sides of the coin. If you want to share any examples, please do share that with us.
Sure, thanks. So one example that I think is particularly relevant, we work with a large consulting firm. And one of the things that they are doing is they are constantly looking for internal employees to be able to put on a specific consulting job that they earn. And so they were having a really tough time internally looking for the right people, because they're a very large organization, looking for the right people to place in specific jobs that they were getting. So I find that is one really interesting way of utilizing micro credentials. Not only have they basically created a curated list of all the types of skills and competencies that they need in order to place their individuals. And they allowed their staff to be able to earn those micro credentials in various ways. They had an entire program around that individuals can go on, take assessments, and earn different digital badges that represented those micro credentials. So they had an internal profile that they were able to store and display all of the micro credentials and badges that they were earning. So that when their department was saying, okay, I need somebody who can do these various things, they could look across the board and say, all right, here's somebody who has earned all these different micro credentials, and they'd be perfect to be able to put on this particular job. So that's one example that I think was fascinating. It took a lot of work, I'm not going to lie, on being able to design that and looking more broadly at what was possible. But I think having that generalized pedagogy around what was important to them as an organization, and looking across and saying, okay, these are the jobs that we're getting as a consulting firm, and we need the various. I think there was maybe 50 different skills that they wanted to represent. And so again, they created an entire learning university around, all right, here's our 50 skills and competencies that we may need on any specific job. And then individuals can say, all right, I want to earn a micro credential and thus earn a badge around these 20 different things. And then they can go through, they click on that and they say, okay, here's all the things that you need to do, both assessment based and in practice based, to be able to earn that. So that organization became the authority, and they said, okay, here's what you need to do in order to earn this badge for this micro credential. And then individuals can again create their own basic their own basic path to being able to earn any one of those, so that they could become more relevant in their consulting firm. So that's a great example of what's possible. And again, took a lot of work, but it was very meaningful for the organization. In terms of another type of way that we've seen micro-credentials in the broader space, again, is that those associations. So a lot of associations come to us and say, okay, what's next? We have our credential. What else can we do? A lot of them have a lot of content that they've developed over the years, and certainly over this year, because so much of it has been online. So they have webinars that have been recorded. They have different courses that they've created. And so what we're finding is that they're saying to themselves, okay, what can I do with all this? Not only it could be a revenue generator, but moreover, it can provide a value add for our current stakeholders. And they basically put things together in clusters. They say, oh, well, we have these 4 different webinars that we've given over the last 3 years. What if somebody were to watch all 4 of those webinars? We put it together, and then that's a skill, that's a competency set. And it could be on a variety of different things. So if an individual, let's say, watches all 4 of those webinars, they may take a short assessment on it, or they may submit saying, hey, I can do all these things. Here's, a short paragraph, or, here's an endorsement from my boss that says I can do those things. They can submit it to their association, and the association can then provide a micro credential that somebody can earn. Obviously, again, a badge can be associated with that. They can bestow that badge to that individual, and that individual can then put it on their resume. So we're finding that organizations are being very creative with what's possible. And again, providing opportunities for them to be nimble in the space with the things that they can now create beyond just certification, or certainly they want to invite new people into their industry and say, okay, you're not ready to sit for our assessment yet, but here's some of the things that you may want to do to prepare yourself. So again, providing some content, providing potentially webinars, other types of videos and other things that they can do in order to sort of be ready to sit for their various types of credential assessments, but really introducing the space to those individuals and getting them prepared to be real vital members of their industry.
Those were some great examples, Ginger, and congratulations to you and your team on accomplishing some of these things. I think the point that you mentioned about webinar, that's very interesting. I think in the last 1.5 years, all of us have gone through tons of these virtual panel discussions, webinars, and other things. And specifically in associations, so much webinars that happen and all those things. So if there was a system to stitch those webinars and give credits in terms of micro credentials or digital badging to the viewers, it will just add up to it, and time well spent. So it looks like we have another question for us. Let me read this out for you. We have a couple of them. The first one is there a system in place to maintain the rigor / meaning of micro credentials? If they can be created for everything, their value will be diluted.
It's a great question. I think that that is certainly a concern. And so when we think about diluting various things or over credentialing something, that becomes an obvious challenge within any industry. So when we think about rigor, and we think about the concept of developing micro credentials that have some, real meat to them, while there isn't a system in place, that's where the authority comes in. So when I look at specifically something like a digital badge that represents that, the metadata that underlies it is really, really important. So unlike a paper certificate where you say, okay, I've completed this, it says nothing about what underlied and again, that rigor that went behind earning that credential. So that's where I like the concept, and where digital badges really, again, got its foothold, is this capability of saying, okay, here's the icon, here's somebody did complete this, but here's what it meant. Here's what somebody did in order to accomplish that. So while there isn't a prescribed thing that says, yes, you need to do these things in order for it to be a micro-credential, I like the fact that it doesn't have those things. It doesn't have the prescribed nature of this is what all micro-credentials have to be, because then again, it doesn't allow the flexibility for organizations to really design what's necessary and important and meaningful for them or for their stakeholders. So I think that concept of really identifying what somebody did and being able to present that so that a viewer can say, oh, it wasn't just a 1-hour webinar and they're ready to go and they know everything about surgery or whatever it may be. Rather, it's okay, here are the things that somebody that did, here's what that rigor was that somebody went through in order to earn this particular micro-credential. So I think there's something really important about having the capability of really showing that underlying information that that is necessary to understanding the nature of that earned credential.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that. And thank you to the audience for asking that interesting question. Ginger, we have 5 minutes left from our scheduled time. It's good that we have entered into the Q&A section because that was the next planned step. So we have a few more questions and comments. I will read them out for you, and please, share your thoughts on those. The next one is, can you talk about the types of metadata that might be linked to a digital badge?
Sure. So when we think about what metadata can be, certainly it is a detailed description of the Met competencies. So to me, that's a really important aspect of that. It can either be done by acknowledging the various skills that somebody attained, but moreover, it can say, all right, here is what somebody did in terms of, okay, this is the actual task that they did, and here are the skills and competencies that they've developed to earn this specific micro-credential. So when we think about that metadata, we want it to be succinct enough so that if somebody were to look at it, it's not you're not reading the whole book on it, but certainly having potentially links in the metadata to to static pages on a site that can help further describe the nature of that credential, I think are really important. But again, the visual and having a real clear description of what somebody needs to do in order to attain that credential, and then for a viewer to be able to understand the nature of that credential. So if I'm a hiring manager, I look at somebody's resume, number one, it's self-reported. That's a problem in and of itself, as any hiring manager will tell you, that they say, okay, I have a position open. I'm looking at this resume. While it looks really great, I have absolutely no real knowledge about whether somebody can do something or not. So to me, the concept of badging really kind of supports this idea of micro-credentialing, in that somebody says on a resume, or they can submit, here are the 6 badges that I've earned that represent various things that I've done in the industry. And then if you click on any one of those badges, you can really see, okay, here's what somebody did in order to earn that credential. So it's very specific. And it really helps to articulate specific skills and competencies that somebody has proven in their industry. So when you ask me about compliance and things like that, it really is part of the authority in the space really being specific about what somebody did in order to earn that specific, to attain that micro-credential and earn that badge for that.
Right, great. And just in continuation to that, I think you briefly touched upon the compliance part. So what is the correlation? Can there be a correlation between micro-credentials and compliance?
Absolutely. So I think that there are a lot of authorities, ANSI, ICE, there's a lot of authorities in this space that are solely focused on the art and the industry of credentialing. So when we think about compliance, they are dipping their toes, and they've done a lot of work in micro-credentialing and producing papers and things around what micro-credentialing is. So while there is that compliance factor in there, I really fight for and really advocate for the fact that I like there to be a whole area that is a little bit beyond just hardcore, compliance. I want there to be a whole area of expertise and a whole area of learning that organizations can use to be nimble around, so that they can really decide for themselves, okay, beyond just compliance, how can I design a program that's really important and meaningful to my stakeholders, and not have to deal with some of the red tape necessary that goes through certification or some other things. And that's where I like to micro-credential to be over here and certification to be over here. I think that they are two very separate things. And I like micro-credentials to be a little bit more nimble for those reasons.
Right, and thank you for sharing those thoughts, and thank you, audience, for asking those wonderful questions. I think this has been a very interesting and very insightful discussion. And Ginger, thank you once again very much for sharing all your thoughts with us in such a detail. I think just towards wrapping it up, I'll just kind of summarize the key takeaways. So today we looked at the role of micro-credential in skill economy. Then we also looked at implementing what are the blocks that we need to consider for implementing micro-credential to navigate through the talent wall that's brewing up there. And the role of blockchain as a technology in setting up micro-credentials. So once again, on behalf of Harbinger Group, we would like to thank you, Ginger, for taking the time out for this. Detlef, we did miss you in this discussion, but hopefully we can have you on another one. Please, we hope you feel better soon. And if you want to have a one-on-one conversation or ask any questions to Ginger regarding how micro-credentials works, please feel free to reach out to her. You'll find her email address in the chat box shortly. And in terms of Harbinger, if you want to talk to Harbinger regarding the blockchain technology or implementation of the technology part of it, please feel free to reach out to us at the email ID mentioned on this PowerPoint. And we'll be around here for another 1 or 2 minutes. If there's anything else that comes to your mind, any last questions, comments, please feel free to drop in. And we want to thank you for taking the time out for this discussion. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. And Ginger, thank you once again very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.